Doctor Who lore. How many doctors have there actually been? Doctor Who lore can be a difficult thing to keep track of. After 60 years of timey-wimey goodness, multiple origin stories, and numerous plot twists, staying on top of the Doctor's myriad lives has become a much trickier task. Of course, the quick answer to the question is 15. There have been 15 Doctors to date, but this is more of a real-world answer than a Doctor Who lore answer. The current Doctor, Ncuti Gatwa, is widely referred to as the 15th Doctor, and this makes sense when you line all the actors up. William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton, John Pertwee, Tom Baker, Peter Davison, Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy, Paul McGann, Christopher Eccleston, David Tennant, Matt Smith, Peter Capaldi, Jodie Whittaker, David Tennant again, and Ncuti Gatwa. Definitive, no? No, because Doctor Who lore doesn't work like that. For a start, in the early days of New Who, we couldn't even be certain that Eccleston was actually the 9th, as the 8th Doctor hadn't filmed a Regeneration. It wasn't until the next Doctor firmly placed Eccleston as the subsequent incarnation after McGann that the definitive Time Lord lineup was complete. And so, for 5 years, fans could be certain of this piece of Doctor Who lore. Christopher Eccleston was the 9th Doctor, and David Tennant was the 10th, and Matt Smith was the 11th. But then came the Day of the Doctor, the series' 50th anniversary special, which turned everything on its head. It transpired that there was a forgotten incarnation of the Doctor which came after McGann, the War Doctor, played by John Hurt. The BBC even filmed a special minisode which showed the Regeneration, with the Time Lord choosing a warrior body in order to fight in the Time War. Technically, this new incarnation changed all of the Doctor Who numbering, so Eccleston became the 10th Doctor, Tennant became the 11th, and Smith became the 12th. Fans did, however, have an out if they wanted to preserve the numbering, as the War Doctor didn't actually call himself the Doctor during this particular incarnation, so in some ways he didn't count. Eccleston would still be the 9th Doctor, as John Hurt was technically someone else. At the same time, there's no denying the War Doctor's place in Doctor Who lore. He is a legitimate incarnation, so if we add him to the list, then we effectively have 16 Doctors to date. And you could stick with this answer and not lose any sleep, but you would have to address the question of the 10th Doctor's regeneration in the Stolen Earth. In this instance, the Doctor died after being shot by a Dalek and underwent a legitimate regeneration. But because he had one of his severed hands sitting in a glass jar on the floor of the TARDIS for complex reasons, he was able to siphon the regenerative energy into it, meaning he could prevent his body from his changing. This is when Doctor Who lore gets a bit confusing, because this was a legitimate regeneration, and if we use the aforementioned numbering, which includes the War Doctor, then this new incarnation would bring our running total to 17. And again, you could justify using this figure within the parameters of Doctor Who lore, but you would need to consider the bonus Doctor, which grew out of the Time Lord's spare hand on the floor of the TARDIS. Because when the Doctor poured his regeneration energy into the hand, it spawned a brand new Doctor, albeit a half-human one. He was a legitimate version of the Time Lord with the same thoughts, personality, and memory, only he didn't, as far as we know, have the ability to regenerate. And so, arguably, this extra incarnation of the Time Lord should be factored into Doctor Who lore, meaning our running total of Doctors is now 18, so get those tattoo needles ready. But before you leave an indelible mark on your bicep, you might want to consider the in-between incarnations of the eponymous Time Lord. These beings are altogether more mysterious, but they still count as the Doctor. The first is the Watcher, a creature who came between the 4th and 5th incarnations and was introduced in the 4th Doctor's last story, Logopolis. He may not have been piloting his own TARDIS around the cosmos, but he was a conscious being, and he could talk, and as such, he is a legitimate piece of Doctor Who lore. The Watcher was followed in 1986 by the Valeyard, who was a more sinister being. He was described as a composite of the dark side of the Doctor's nature, sitting between the 12th and 13th incarnations. He wanted to steal the 6th Doctor's remaining lives in order to extend his own existence, and acted as the prosecutor at the Time Lord's trial. And so, on this point, Doctor Who lore is quite clear. Both the Watcher and the Valeyard were undeniably the Doctor, as they came from his timeline and his regeneration cycle. So this brings our total to 20. There are 20 Doctors. Keeping up? Don't worry, we'll soon throw you into a vortex of confusion as we now come to the conundrum of the Fugitive Doctor and the Timeless Children. In Series 12, showrunner Chris Chibnall turned Doctor Who lore on its head by revealing that William Hartnell was not the first Doctor, but that the Time Lord had in fact begun life as a little girl. She regenerated, and in the 2020 episode, The Timeless Children, we see the child undergo 5 additional regenerations, with the Fugitive Doctor, played by Joe Martin, coming later in this timeline, presumably predating Hartnell. So, in short, we're given an extra 7 Doctors to play with, plus Joe Martin. And if we're to assume that these events really took place and weren't some trick by the celestial toy maker, that means we now have 27 Doctors firmly rooted in Doctor Who lore. Now, all we need to do is figure out where to place Peter Cushing, Rowan Atkinson, Richard E. Grant again, Jim Broadbent, Hugh Grant, Joanna Lumley, the Curator, David Warner, and all the images from Morbius's mind scanner. And for that, we might need a bigger blog post. In the meantime, tell us, how many Doctors do you think there have been, and how do you count them? Let us know in the comments below.